Friends, welcome. It's great to have you all here. My name is Sam Heath, and I'm with a national organization called Equal Justice USA. And we do work around death penalty repeal, restorative justice, and community safety. And this event that you're at is a panel that we're asking and answering the question about how do we interrupt violence. So this is coming out of CCDA. CCDA is the Christian Community Development Association. They're a national group that does work around what does it look like to reconcile and love in and through neighborhoods and with our neighbors. And each year they have a week that focuses on mass incarceration, and it's called Locked in Solidarity Week. And we're in the last couple days of Locked in Solidarity Week, and it's a week-long focus on mass incarceration, but it's different events, some in person, some on Zoom like this, so that people can be equipped to think about and work against mass incarceration. So when I say that, what we're talking about is the whole criminal legal system of punishment, police, prisons, of cops, cages, confinement, all of those parts and pieces. But one thing that's really important to know about that is mass incarceration, for the most part, is a symptom of something rather than the main problem. And under that, I think that mass incarceration is a fear-based response to fearing others and to not knowing what to do when we encounter conflict, and especially not knowing what to do when we encounter violence. And that's why this group has been assembled here. It is representing three different groups from three different cities. I'll intro them in a bit, but we have Chicago, New Orleans, and Charlottesville, Virginia here to talk about different ways that these groups are working against violence and toward healing. And both of those are really key. A couple logistics before we dive into things. So you heard when you came in, this is recorded. And so what we'll do for anybody who's here, you've registered for the event, which is great. We will make sure to get you a recording of this, both a YouTube video and a Spotify link so you can watch or listen so that you can come back to this and share this with others. So we'll send that to you later today. Also, any link that we mention or any link that I might put in the chat, especially to these three orgs that we're going to talk about, those will be in the email to you as well. Because I want to make sure you can follow up with these groups and learn more or find ways to support them. Last thing is I want to make sure you know that at the end, we'll save about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the hour for questions. So if you have questions that come up while you're listening, feel free to put them in the chat. But even better, if you want to put them in the Q&A feature, that way they'll live there and I can come back to them at the end. So you can see Q&A at the bottom. If you don't, you can click on those three dots and you'll see the Q&A button. And at any point, you can type in a question there and we'll circle back to it so that you can look at that. Some of you are already doing this in the chat, which is great. If you want to share in the chat your name, your org, or your church, if you're with a faith space or a location, please feel free to put that there. It's always fun to see where people are coming in from. So again, thank you for being here. Thanks to CCDA for helping put this on and co-sponsor this. And we'll talk a little more at the end about how to follow up and learn more about CCDA and how to learn more about the Locked in Solidarity group if you really want to think through and work against mass incarceration. So this panel is involving three different people from three different organizations in three different cities, working against violence in really ways that overlap and in ways that are specific to their cities. Before I intro them, the last thing I want to share with you is we're going to use the word violence a lot, and that word can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And at CCDA, we work to have a set definition of here's what we mean when we say violence. I'm going to put it in the chat, but I'm also going to read through it because I want to make sure that we're at a baseline together of what it is when it means when we talk about violence. And who knows, maybe the three guys here are going to take issue with it and we can talk about it. That's fine. That's fine too. But here's where we're starting when we talk about violence. So think of it this way. Violence, it's more than physical force. It's a psychological, institutional, and systemic, manifesting in words, actions, and policies that impose control and power over others. This Locked in Solidarity Week, we invite practitioners to step into the transformative work of interrupting violence. Together, let us disrupt cycles of harm, challenge systems of oppression, and cultivate peace and justice in our communities through intentional acts of restoration and advocacy. All right, there's a lot of words there, but one of the main things I was wanting to have us communicate with that definition is that first sentence. Violence is more than physical force. Violence can be psychological. Violence can also be control and pain inflicted by systems or institutions. So it can be interpersonal and it can be systemic. And just from looking at these three orgs, and especially with Charlottesville, because I know that one well, that's where I'm living and where I'm from, I know that these orgs are thinking about violence really holistically. So I'm going to put in the chat here what I'm going to talk through for our panelists that are here. And I'm really thankful that they've joined us. And again, I'll send you links to all of their sites. But we're going to have a conversation today. So Ernest Johnson is here from New Orleans, and he's the co-founder and director of a group called Ubuntu Village. And they're doing a lot of work in New Orleans, or New Orleans, as I feel like where I'm supposed to say. So Ernest, I'm thankful that you're here. We're going to learn a lot about the work that you're doing. Brian Page is also here, and Brian Page is the assistant executive director of a group called Central Virginia Violence Interruptors. They used to be called the Buck Squad, and their website says you can still call us the Buck Squad, but that stood for Brothers United to Cease the Killing. And they're in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they're a group that I get to benefit from and see and overlap with a lot because Charlottesville is the place I call home. And third and finally, we've got Aaron Rivas here, and he's several things with a group that's in Chicago called New Life Centers. So they're a group that's in multiple different neighborhoods. And Aaron's part of the street outreach team there. I also believe he's the director of what's called Pathways to Peace. And we'll talk about what all of that means. So all three of these orgs that are here are really rooted in their cities. And they're going to talk through and they're going to share some of what their work is, what's going on, what are some of the challenges. And then at the end, we want to really think through what are ways that others can come in and support that work or take pieces of it. And what can it look like in their places and spaces across the country? Because we've got a lot of people here engaging and listening to this, which is great. Okay, Brian, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. And I know you talk about this well. What does a typical night look like for Central Virginia Violence Interrupters? And I think that'll give people a sense of some of the rhythms of your work.
Uh, what we try to do is canvas what we call the hotspot neighborhoods, where the potential for violence is more visible, and we get out there and we try to engage the people, especially the shooters, which in this time we find is a lot of young kids. So we try to engage them and stray them away from the activities that lead to gun violence, because we understand it's deeper than gun violence. It's a generational thing that we have noticed. It's passed down from generation to generation when violence is something that's become normal, right? So we try to get the underlying factors and get to them, to try to stop them from going that route. So we try to canvass the neighborhoods all night to 2 o'clock in the morning. We be out there every day except for 2 days a week. We out there in the streets, canvassing different neighborhoods, and try to pass out resources to try to help them get out of the streets.
So, Brian, I know you all both encounter and kind of stumble on violence as you're out patrolling, but you also get calls. So what does that balance look like of both responding to things that you see and then engaging things when you all get calls? And I know you track your calls too, and you guys get a lot of calls.
Yeah, we have a hotline number that we use for the whole city, to anybody to call, and we try to respond to everything. With anything dealing with a shooting, we call it a shooting response. So we get in there and try to stop the retaliation, because most of the homicides throughout America is based on retaliation. So the hotline enables us to get to the scene, or sometimes stop it before it occurs. And that's the beauty of the hotline, because it is ringing all day and all night long. Some of the calls be frivolous, but usually we get to the scene of a shooting. And it's been a couple times when people have got shot while we've been on scene. So it can get dangerous at times.
Yeah. I mean, the work that you do, Brian, I know is really practical, risky work. I mean, you're showing up to a space without weapons, but yet with skills to intervene and interrupt this. And later on, I want to ask about some of the training that you all have received because I know that's been really helpful and kind of the model you have. I just put in the
Yep.
chat so people can see the mission for you all, Central Virginia Violence Interrupters, and it's talking about reducing the cycle of gun-related crime and homicides. But you're not just there interrupting things, because I know, Brian, you all do a lot of things because you engage other things. And I've heard you talk really passionately about if we don't go back to the source of where this is coming from, then we're just going to be continuing to do this forever. How do you think about and talk about what is the source of a lot of this violence?
Well, the source is a lot of mental health and trauma that's going on inside these impoverished communities that has been going on for generations. I
Hmm.
myself am a product of it. I was that kid that led a violent life in my younger years, ended up in prison and doing a lot of years in prison. So quite aware of the trauma. Now we are also aware of the children to prison pipeline when they are already giving up on these kids in the second and third grade, right, in these communities. So what we've tried to do is we have to find a way to get to them kids at the same age,
Hmm.
to prevent them from putting a gun in their hand or from thinking the way they think, because it's all about mindsets. Gun violence is based on how you think, your mindset. So if this was passed down to you, you really thinking you are doing the right thing. And as a child whose brain is not fully developed,
Hmm.
he has no problem shooting nobody, right? So we can get in and offer different things to them, different lifestyles. We feel like we can save their lives, and we try to do
Hmm.
that every day. But when you lack the resources to get into these communities, because we feel the local governments don't take it serious.
Hmm.
They still looking at people as good people, bad people. And there's no such thing.
Hmm.
It's your environment that you coming up under. So we have to rally around the youth. So 4 or 5 years from now, we won't have to worry about them putting a gun in their hand.
Hmm.
That, and then parenting. We find that most parents are not active parents.
Hmm.
We got fathers missing in the home. We got mothers on drugs. It's just so much trauma going on inside these communities. I found out last week that in our community, we have 135 kids that's homeless
Hmm.
between the city and county that's going to school every day. Right. So how do we address this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It
that's
all
what
it
we're
all
trying to get.
relates.
That's
Yeah.
right. It leads to gun violence. It
Yeah.
leads to everything.
Yeah. I I I really appreciate the way that you talk about a lot of this as a cycle of something that continues on. So much of it is interconnected. Unless there's intervention, it continues on.
Yep.
Ernest, I'd love to turn to you and ask for people who might not know this. What does Ubuntu mean, and how did the group begin? But especially that name and that word. What's the background of that, and why was that something that you wanted to bring as the name for the work that you're doing?
Yes, thank you, Sam, for asking because it's the core of our organization. And for those of you all don't know, Ubuntu means I am because we are. It's a reflection of humanity through the lens of empathy. And that's our core mission in anything we do, and understanding that we're talking about human beings and trying to save lives, and a reflection of what you will want for yourself and others should be done through the lens of empathy.
I'm gonna put in the chat some of what was down on the site for mission and vision and goals for you all. Um, and you have down, we're a Black-led multiracial group made up of parents, young people, and community members. We support and build power with those most impacted by systemic racism, violence, and incarceration. And then the next piece, Ernest, I would love to hear you talk about this. It says, instead of replicating these systems of oppression, we keep us safe. What does it mean that we keep us safe? Aren't we already safe with the way things are set up in society? And I know you're saying we aren't. So then what does that mean for you all?
So we understand based on the previous things you talk about in your opening sentence around the identification of violence and what people may deem as what is violence, and it comes in a number of forms. So when we talk about keeping us safe, we know historically systemic system has been oppression systems that keeps us down. An instance that when there's a victim or a shooting, we call the law enforcement, we call EMS, right, to respond to these specific issues. But then there's a victim and a perpetrator. And too often in poor, impoverished communities, it's the aftermath of an incident that has already happened. So, in order to keep us safe, we have identified specific neighborhoods in New Orleans that are our target areas. And to keep us safe, not only do we educate, we agitate those specific social, economic opportunities in that community to ensure that there's transformation in a prevented way in keeping us safe. Knowing our neighbors, knowing who's on a block, knowing who's doing something wrong, knowing how we talk to our kids in those specific neighborhoods so that we can transform that neighborhood and go from that neighborhood to the next neighborhood to the next neighborhood. And what I will say to you, Sam, is that if I don't protect my neighbor or my family, how could I expect law enforcement in some instance or someone else historically that has been a structural system or institution that has not provided the things that we need to keep us safe? You know, we push back in New Orleans against the city council because they put about 80% of some of the budget into law enforcement, but for families and service providers, it was like 5%. So
Hmm.
there wasn't an equal balance that we see it every day in our government, right? So our goal is to keep us safe, that we keep us safe. And we keep us safe not only talking about gun violence, because we know violence come in multiple ways, right? We keep us safe about giving social economic opportunities to those who are more vulnerable around housing, around, food, making sure that people have the basic things in their lives every day to keep us safe.
Mm. I want to give a nod to, I saw Major Emmanuel CA that you came in. We'll talk about New Life Centers in just a bit. I'm glad you're here. Ernest, so much of what you said struck me, but I love the phrase of you talking about we have to not only educate, but agitate. And so I'm hearing you say the system is not going to provide all the things that you need to be safe. And those are things that you both need to pursue and create for yourselves. Say more about that agitate piece, though. What is it? What do you mean by that, and what does that look like in practical terms?
So when we talk about agitate, we're talking about addressing policies that are unjust, but also we're talking about our local government, right, and how it provides and ensuring that we keep our foot on the pedal per se to ensure that they are passing policies and addressing the specific issues that we're talking about. I will say, and for the means of transparency, it don't always go the way we expect it to go. So when we talk about we keep us safe, we don't go into a city council meeting asking for specific policies, right? With a guarantee that it's going to go the way we want it to go,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So when there's failure, we don't want people to get distorted, right? Or anxiety or depressed because the local government didn't do what we supposed to do. That relies on us. If they're not doing what they're supposed to do, then we should find a way to ensure that we are taking care of each other because
Hmm.
the struggle has been real in Black and poor communities forever, right? And we
Hmm.
have learned to survive. And I would like to talk a little bit more about this conversation because we are culturally motivated in New Orleans, right? We have one of the most unique cities and in a country, right?
Yeah.
Not only in the country but in the world,
Yeah.
and we lean on that a lot, right? And it infused us to celebrate and even some of our darkest moments.
Hmm. It's been one of the unique experiences of my life, the times I've been in New Orleans. It is coming in as an outsider. It is a very different feel in every sense, largely in a good way. Well, one other thing, Ernest, I'd love to hear what are some of the programs that you all engage in, and I really want to nudge you to talk about instead. That's when I was reading about that also really seemed valuable in some beautiful ways.
So we have multiple programs under Ubuntu Village. I'll start with Instead. Instead is an alternative that addresses mental health and trauma issues in lieu of any individual with minor offenses to be incarcerated. They walk hand in hand with their clients with medicine, housing, and all the basic needs we talk about because we in New Orleans and maybe in every other urban city, incarceration becomes the mental health clinic, right? When you
Mm,
incarcerate people with mental health issues, that's where they get the service at in jail. So
hmm
in lieu of that, instead of replicating that, we try to take it outside of the jail in lieu of incarceration and ensure those people get the service they need um, at home. Also, we run a juvenile justice parent navigator system that educates parents who kids who have been incarcerated, and we do family meals, understanding that every holiday we call it families, keeping families connected because we know families are most vulnerable during the holidays. So we are sort of like the liaison for the juvenile detention center. If the parents have an issue with the detention center, we kind of be the liaison and mediate those specific issues and ensure that everyone comes out feeling the same. And lastly, we were invited by the New Orleans Health Department to do a violence and prevention plan because we have had it in previous years and it has been upscaled and then dismissed. But this time we have came in it and building an ecosystem, and we're in partnership with the New Orleans Health Department, University Medical Center, the Trauma Center, Vera Institution. So Tulane, who does our research and does the data for us, and we're the community component of it. I will say to you, the community component is sometimes tends to get depressed, right? Because we understand dealing with institutions, and most of us know when you're dealing with hospitals, they service you and they kick you out, right? And so we're trying to get to a point to sort of like having these urban clinics so that people can, when they are dismissed from the hospital, because they are going back to some of the same environments, that
hmm
they have the same type of services in their communities that they may have at the hospital. And we believe in keeping us safe that people are the experts of their own experience,
mm
regardless of what we believe and how we see it and not having the answers. We try to walk with them and give them the services that they need, and
hmm
not and default to trust, right? Not be able to say, well, they shouldn't, or they because we don't know. Everyone is an expert of their own experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ernest. I love hearing that when you're able to, there are ways to partner with the system and engage it as best you can. There are things you want to ask for and sometimes demand. But if they don't, we're going to go and make it happen. And we know what that looks like. And I love that rather than waiting on those things, we're going to go and we're going to build that. And we're going to do that confidently, knowing that we've got the skill set to do it. I think that's important, but that's rare. I'd love to turn to both Aaron and Major. So you guys are in Chicago. You are helping lead and do work with New Life Centers. And maybe I'll start here because this is what struck me first as I started reading up about you all is that the tagline for New Life Centers is creating the beloved community together. Maybe start there. Why is that such an important phrase? And how does that relate to the work that you all do in Chicago?
Um, we can I can let Major jump in so he can introduce himself, and
Great.
then we can both tag that one.
Hello, everyone. Major Emmanuel, CA with New Life Centers. The beloved concept is, that comes from Dr. King. And so to know Little Village is to know that we're made of many communities. There's 77 official communities and many more unofficial. Aaron and I serve a community called Little Village, which is known as the Mexico of the Midwest. But now with the new arrivals, that's changing, right? Those that are coming from Venezuela and Colombia and
Mm,
other countries. But historically, we are a community that butts up against another community called North Lawndale. So Little Village's official name is South Lawndale, and then there's a black community called North Lawndale, and there's a long history between the two. going back to when King was here and when the riots happened, um, when they marched here. So there's a black and brown unity, especially along the border. If you come to Little Village, there's a street called Ogden, and on Ogden, there's that blend between the two communities, and a lot of social justice that's happened throughout, the decades between the two. So when addressing violence, it was kind of a no-brainer to say, well, how do we, intentionally bring these two communities together because we're all dealing with the same issue. So for us, it made sense to say, okay, well, how do we then expand this because we're all dealing with it in our nuances. And I think Ernest hit it on the head that, the people that make up the community are the experts of their own reality. So
Mhm.
how do you be intentional about bringing them into the fold to address the issues, whether it's housing, whether it's food, whether it's gang prevention, whatever the case may be, job security, and just future. But
Mhm.
really being intentional about bringing those people into the fold because these issues, these social ills, are not islands in and of themselves. They're connected to systemic racism and economic depravity and all of those things. So New Life being really intentional about bringing people to the fold and trying to figure out how do we do this together. And I
Mhm.
think this will segue into what Aaron is leading, a new initiative. So for the last 15 years, everyone's been looking at Chicago to see what's Chicago going to do, right? So we had something called the Boston Project that helped to reduce violence in Boston, the Grid in LA, Atlanta's doing their thing, Philadelphia, but then everyone looking to Chicago. And so now it was kind of like you put your money where your mouth is, right? So we're seeing the business community come in, the entrepreneurial sector come into the fold, and other leaders to say, okay, don't judge, but what is it that you have? Where's your skin in the game? Because we're going to need a little bit of everyone. So there's something called in this realm in the last 20 years, the term CVI has been creeping up, and you hear more and
Mhm.
more of it, right? Community violence intervention. And what it is saying, okay, we know that there's gang intervention, right? We know that there's street politics, but that's not the only ingredient to this. What does mental health look like? Ernest had mentioned that. What does education look like? What is job readiness, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. So really being intentional about bringing those individuals and those practitioners into the fold so that we
Mhm.
can create this thing called CVI. And so now Chicago's ready to launch something called CS2, and that's uh, Safer Communities, right? Community Intervention for a Safer Chicago, hence the name SC2. And our rendition of that is Pathways to Peace. And the beautiful part of it is seeing these communities take this basic concept of the five pillars and then adding their nuance to it, making it so that it's specific or germane to their community. So that's something that we're about to launch, and Aaron can talk a little bit more about that.
Mm. That's great. I love the nod, more than a nod, the inspiration from King. And I feel like a lot of people forget. I think people think that King's life ended after he got the Nobel Peace Prize, but he
Mm-mm.
continued on. His popularity nationally plummeted because he continued to engage the anti-war effort and talking about economics. And he ended his life by moving his family up to Chicago to really focus on, Brian, some of the stuff you were talking about earlier. What are these root causes of violence? And he thought you cannot address violence without addressing economic inequality. And I'm going to put in the chat the mission for New Life Centers of connecting young people and their families with Christ and community through life on life relationships. So, Aaron, jump in with any of that, but also especially mention New Life Centers is doing a lot of this work specifically out of a place of faith as well. So, please share about that.
Awesome, man. I think that's my intro and that's my lane.
Perfect.
Sitting here listening to Brian, Ernest, and Major, and I'm just looking at, I'm looking at these individuals who have who God's people are in obscure places, right? And we're leading our youth and our people to and when I say we, I'm talking about New Life, right? But the language that Ernest and the language that Brian is speaking is man, I totally understand the canvassing. I totally understand the issues that our young people are facing, that, who are homeless. Just to touch on that real quick, we just buried a 14-year-old kid right before Christmas who was homeless and who was in this house where he felt like he was safe. And in that safe house, amongst his friends, a gun went off, and he was shot. He was shot in the chest. And I've been to a lot of funerals, and that's not a medal that I love to wear, but this one was so different because we didn't even have enough pallbearers to carry the casket, because this kid he was alone. That's how lonely he was. But God put him in our way, and while he was with us, we showed him love. We prayed with him, and he felt like, he felt God's love through us. So speaking on the mission, leading people to Christ, I'm just gonna add real quick, just I'm gonna call it an impact story because it impacted my life. When I first started working, in Little Village, my goal was saving lives. That's what I'm like, man. People would say, "Hey, man, I'm glad you're out there trying to save lives," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal." So one day, I had a 14-year-old young man, who I was mentoring at the time, and he was one of my first in my caseload. It was about 12 o'clock on a Saturday night, and he asked me to drop him off in a historically hot spot in the community. And I looked at him and I said, my boy, if I drop you off right here, I'm going to do you a disservice. I shouldn't be your mentor if I'm going to drop you off right here, man. Like, let me take you home where you're safe, and we'll catch up tomorrow. So we were going back and forth, back and forth. Finally, he said, "All right, man, can you give me something to eat before you drop me off?" I'm like, "Man, that's easy." So, we go to McDonald's, I get him what he wants, and then, I drop him off. And as he's jumping out of the van, he jumps out of the van and he's walking through the gangway to get into his house. I see him, he goes in the house, he gives me the "I'm okay." He goes inside it, and I take off. I go home. It's been a long week. It's about, quarter to 1 in the morning while I'm dropping him off. 2 hours later, my phone is ringing off, like it's just going off, and it's the community calling me. So this young man and 9 other children in the same apartment lost their lives to a house fire. And the oldest one was 17, and the youngest one was 3 months old. So that was my introduction to, like, losing participants, losing, and I'm like, man, like, kind of like talking to God, like, God, I put him in the house where he was safe, like, like, and kind of the response that God gave me was like, I didn't bring you to Little Village in this neighborhood to save lives. I brought you to this neighborhood to save souls. And then that's when everything changed for me. That's when everything changed for me, because we don't know when things are going to happen in the neighborhood. People talk about random shootings and random this and random that. Our community deals with a historic 50 to 60 years of people losing their lives in those same communities. So when birthdays come, holidays come, people feel a certain type of way. Mental health issues, people that are drug abuse, all those things. You just broke up with your girlfriend, your friend that passed away's anniversary is coming up. Now you're a young man with a gun in your hand. Like, any little thing will set you off. And a lot of these things are happening in our community that we're just trying to keep up with the, man, why, or what happened, or what's going on. So, for me as a man of God, it's a lot of praying with these individuals and a lot of real conversations about, like, do you believe? Like, do you believe that one day that we're the only guarantee in life is death, and we're all going to see it no matter what kind of life we live? And in between that is it's your opportunity to say, somebody did come up to me and talk to me about God, and his name was Brother Aaron. So yeah, to me, man, I'm just here. I'm a servant before anything. And I love to hear, seasoned veterans, man, that have been around, that didn't give up, because they didn't give up. Somebody like Ernest, somebody like Brian, somebody like Major didn't give up, gave me an opportunity to come and serve in Little Village, man, and to be a part of this movement.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron, for walking through all that. I mean, I hear in all of you what you're saying is these communities where you are both are places of great need And yet these are places of great beauty. There's great capability there, especially Ernest, you talking about how we keep each other, we keep us safe. Um, a lot of what you're saying for all of you seems to come from these past experiences in life. I also know, and Brian, I want to go back to Charlottesville and Central Virginia Violence Interrupters. I also know that for you all, there was a season of specific training for the work that you all were doing with Cure Violence, because violence interruption in a formal way, like what you all are doing on the streets at night and early in the morning, like it is a skill set and requires some specific training to intervene in that way. What did that training look like, and why was that training really important for you all?
Well, I can give you a good example. When we first started, we had no philosophy. It was just people coming together saying we're gonna put an end to this. And once we got the training from out of Chicago with Kobe, came out here with Cure Violence. One of the first things I learned was never engage an angry participant, right? Because I had got a gun pulled out on me like the first 3 days. Like, man, get from over here. And I got angry. I returned back to my old self, right? Because it was, you see what I'm saying? But the training taught me this philosophy. Like, if somebody is angry, just get away from them. You can't talk them down. Don't attempt to talk them down. If you safer by just letting them go, right? So the training, it taught us so much on how to deal with humans, right? Even though we've been dealing with this all our lives, because everybody that worked for us has been to prison or has been shot or been a former gang member. You have to have those relationships in the streets in order for the program to work. And we kind of use the virus to stop the virus. That's how we do it. That's our approach, right? So the training made us, it kind of professionalized everything, right? And not only that, they gave us the room to get to the outreach part of the program, to actually do something about to get a kid out of these situations as opposed to talking about it, man, just put the gun down. Because one thing we learned, somebody can put the gun down Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But Thursday, he could shoot somebody, right? Because it's the mindset. As long as the mindset is still there, the potential for violence is still there. But we are seeing lately, within the last 6, 7, 8 months, when we are bringing in these young kids, that kind of made it fashionable for people that want to join us, right? And we're seeing a beautiful coming around now of kids that want to be helped, And so this is when you are being successful. When you take the training and you apply it.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing a thread in a lot of what is being shared of some of the work that you all are doing comes out of these really raw experiences, right? And Aaron, you talked about that. At another level, some of this comes out of just in general, there's just a common grace within humans that we have the ability to connect with others. We want community. We want to move towards peace. That's part of something that's built into us. And then, Brian, I'm hearing in some of what you're saying, like there's also training that's really important. That you can have a lot of life experience, you can have all these things, but you're naming some of these really specific skills of what does it look like, as you say, just to deal with humans in those kinds of situations. And all three of those things kind of come together to engage a lot of the work that you all are doing.
Yeah. The thing is with me, right, is like I said, I was that kid that went to prison when I was 16. I did over 25 years of my life in those prisons, right? So I done seen everything that it is to see when it comes to violence. So I just dig deep within myself and say, what could I have did differently, or what could have been offered to me to make me don't go that route, right? So that's why it make it easier to know the needs of the youth. And if real, it's not that complicated. They just need things. You got to get into the family trauma, dig in, and before you know it, that same child will change his life and be working. And we see it every day. That's completely opposite of what we walked into when we first started dealing with them as participants.
Yeah. I have some colleagues who say something similar of violence always comes from an unmet need. And that can be a host of things. So what does it look like to engage that need? And so not just stopping the violence, but again, going back to that root cause and identifying what that is. Ernest, I'd love to hear from you. We said a little bit before things started here about what are some things that you all do with Ubuntu that are specifically coming out of being in New Orleans? Like what is it about New Orleans that uniquely needs you? And what are some ways that you all are working to meet some of those unique needs in New Orleans? As you said, one of the most unique cities in the world.
Yes. As if you know, a lot of times we talk about data-driven systems, right? And we understand one life loss is too many. So what we're trying to do is be more transformative and digest the myths that, you know, young people are committing all the crimes, Black people, brown people are committing all the crime. So this one thing is that we're trying to create a different narrative, but secondly, to dip into the culturally aspect of New Orleans and understand is that we have always taken care of ourselves. We got a place called Congo Square where normally in the South, when Africans and slaves were in fields across the country, we were able to congregate in that particular space to exchange goods, to create music. It's where jazz was born at. We was able to, you know, Mexican Indians, indigenous people, you know, everybody just came together and shared. So within that spirit, we tried to engage individuals in our city, understanding that externally we look at people and say, oh, that ain't supposed to be that, or this is that. Our work comes from inside internally. Our office is housed in a church. We understand that there's a spiritual guidance in everything we do in life. And we try to connect that and use the music and the culture of New Orleans to get people to understand their value, right? That we don't have to shoot each other. We don't have to abuse each other to be happy and to live a, you know, a healthy life. As we know, oppressed systems look at it totally different. So we try to generate that same conversation with every individual. If I'm talking to politics, I talk about like I'm talking to a junkie on the corner. I have overcome some of those same issues, but I don't try to relive those specific issues because I know they are detrimental. And I do know that when we're talking to young people, we're talking in a different language, right? So how do we identify them and integrate them with the things that we're doing on their terms, right? And be hip enough to understand. I work more of the administration part of it. So like our peace ambassadors, they're engaged. They have got training. They've been part of Care Violence. We currently work with Marcus McAllister. We work with Equal Justice USA. You know, we work with Chico Tillman. So we still have that brand of what CVI has been, but we know because of the transformation of national government and local government, as we have seen happen, that we have to be more strategic and do this in a transformative way so that we don't lose our mission and our goals. And I would encourage people knowing, you know, that it's a lot of rhetoric going on. We've seen they close the Office of Gun Violence from a government agency, so there's a threat there. But I would encourage people to stick to your mission and be strategic and intentional about what you're doing and never give up.
That's wise. And I hear you on change in power and administrations having a direct effect. I believe it was just yesterday that it came out that Louisiana is looking to re-up and re-engage in the death penalty, and that they specifically set a date for an 81-year-old man. And so I just name that as an example of, you know, the system is responding to violence largely with more violence. But the work that you all are doing is stepping into that and trying to break that cycle in some of these ways. Major and Aaron, I'd love to turn back to you guys and hear. There's two things that about programs that I know you all engage in that it'd be great to share here, I think. Both the street outreach work and the restorative justice work. So what does that look like in Chicago with New Life Centers?
I can I'll touch on the street outreach programs, and Mage, you can do the restorative if that's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now in Chicago, a lot of our programming, we have it depends on the community. It depends on the participants. But for the most part, right now, yesterday I was in the office, and there was probably about 6, 7 kids that were in the office, and they were all under the age of 18, and half of them had the electronic monitor on them. They're even though they're not in jail, they're still locked up. They can't do a lot of things because they have them. They got a monitor on. And so we, for the youth, we in our community, we try to take them and expose them to different things outside of the neighborhood. A lot of these young men and women that are from the neighborhood never leave the neighborhood. So their parents never left the neighborhood. Their family has never left the neighborhood. So the neighborhood is all they know. And one of our street outreach workers created like some tangible goals, and he shared with us. He said, one of my participants said he's never been to Olive Garden. And like that was like it was a win, man, to take a kid to Olive Garden. And that was something that was broken. There was a boundary that was broken. And little by little, we have those when we use those type of spaces, we try to connect with our youth, and just talk about things that they normally wouldn't talk about in front of their friends, expose them to different things. We have recreational spaces that we use. Friday nights we have an open gym night that went from like 2 to 3 kids, and now there's like 60 kids in that gym. And they're like, they look forward to being in these places, in these spaces. Program could like yesterday we got a message from Matt saying like, hey, I got Bulls tickets, can who needs them? And it was like, oh man, like taking the kids to a Bulls game. And it's like something that they're always going to have with them because they've never been exposed to anything like that. I myself, during the George Floyd riots in Chicago, where Little Village went through a tough 4 to 5 days. After everything went down, after all of that happened, we also lost a 13-year-old kid, Adam Toledo, to a police officer. He was shot and killed in the neighborhood, and that kid was friends with a lot of the guys that I was mentoring at the time. So I remember Matt telling me, like, he was like, man, bro, you're going through a lot. Like, you should get away for a little bit. And my response to him was, I if I leave and I leave these kids behind, like, I can't do that. So we came up with something where I was able to leave, and I took 4 or 5 of the youth with me. We rented a beach house, and we got groceries for the week, and like just like living with them, making them breakfast, making them lunch, making them and like them being able to walk around like that neighborhood, and they're looking at houses like, oh, look at this house, look at that house. And like I'm kind of sitting on the back burner just watching them be kids. And these kids are kids that normally wouldn't be able to just walk around the street like that. Every car that passes by in their community, they're looking, they're traumatized. Everybody that comes through with tinted windows, they're looking, they're traumatized. The police comes through, they're looking, they're traumatized. And for these couple of days, they were able to be free in their mind. And that was like one of the programs that we that kind of like when I came back and I said, man, we have to do this with all across the board. Like everybody in every community that we serve, we should be able to detach these kids and take them somewhere and just show them a little bit of life, man, and give them that like notion, like that there's more to life than just the block in the neighborhood. And when you step out of that when you step out of your comfort zone, man, like it's all growing, it's all growth. So we have that. And so yeah, pretty much we do that every weekly. We try to take kids out. We try to take participants out. We have a grief group with a parent grief group that happens at every other Wednesday with parents who lost their family or loved ones to gun violence. And it is that they heal each other. There's nobody there that tells them how to heal. They understand the hurt. They understand each other. So them just being in the same space with each other, it creates a healing antidote for a lot of them. So I'm not sure if I missed anything else outside of the programs, Mage, besides our weekly, taking taking the guys out. We also have tattoo removals that happen every week in different parts of our community. So our community is based is three different fractions. So a lot of the times we have to have resources on wheels because these individuals, it's dangerous for us to put them on the bus, or it's dangerous for us to take them out of their neighborhood because they're high risk individuals and a lot of people know them. So we bring a lot of the resources into the neighborhood for them to to be able to get their tattoos removed, get a good meal that they've never had before, and just trying to come up with rec spaces and things of that nature, just so they can be kids, man.
That's huge. That's
Yeah.
huge. Yeah, Major, please jump in.
So let me start by saying, for all the gentlemen here, we are agitators and instigators. Okay.
Yes, sir. Let's go.
When you all of us have a washing machine, and without that agitator, the clothes, right, it doesn't do what it needs to do. And what's imperative about this work is that is nothing new under the sun. And I smile because we have Brian here and we have Ernest here, and the cure violence. And I remember when we were when the Chicago Project for Violence Prevention was just launching, and something called Ceasefire was the next major campaign, right? Prior to the Chicago Intervention Network, going back to Mayor Harold Washington, right, in the 80s and 90s, and that nothing new was under the sun, and that not only are we trying to push outward, but we're also trying to agitate inward. And I think Brian had mentioned it with the professionalism and the trainings that die unto thyself. Ernest talked about that. Hey, man, I could be of the social ill, but I know that I can't partake in it because it's destructive. And so, what does that mean for me internally? And then because you can tell somebody something, but they know who you are when you show them, when they see your walk. When you don't, it's the nonverbal, right? It's the way that you carry yourself and the things that you value, right? They say, let me see what you believe in and let me look at your bank account and that'll tell me what you do, right? So I remember there was the situation where some mentors had a meeting at an organization on the 13th floor of this building. And as the meeting was done, they brought one of the participants because they were advocating for him for some services. And as they're leaving, uh, they're waiting for the elevator. And at the elevator was these big bay windows that looked out over the horizon of the Art Institute of Chicago. And if you know Chicago, the water is right across. And so for Ernest, Lake Pontchartrain, right, how important the water is, that there's something calming and soothing about it, right? And so I'm just watching this young man and he's just staring there and they're staring there for about 5 minutes. And I said, hey man, is everything okay? And this young man was 21 years old, right? And they said, no, man, he's just looking out. He's never been in a building past the fifth floor, right? Another time there was some peacekeepers. They were about to do a peace circle, and they decided to have it at the Point. So for those that know Chicago, the Point is in Hyde Park. It's this beautiful section that kind of protrudes out into the water, and they were going to hold this circle, and the circle was happening around 6 o'clock. This was at the end of the summer, so this is when the sun is setting. And these young men were just in a trance, just watching it. I'm like, what's going on? Like, man, we've never been here. We've never seen the sun from this angle. So it's those little things, right, that we take for granted that are powerful, right, and that our young people just don't have access to. So as it relates to us and the way that we engage, one, that we're trying to internalize ourselves and improve, but then how do we agitate the system? So like for restorative justice, yeah, we can be in the system. We have kids and we go into incarcerated facilities, blah, 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 this, that, and the third, right? But what about their voice?
Mm.
How do they get heard? And so we come in and remind those adults that have that power, that how do you make yourself vulnerable? Because if you really want to see change, you got to open up and you got to take off that armor so that I can show you my pain, you can show me yours, and that's how we connect. Because without that, where do we go from, right? How do we really hear each other and listen to each other's heart? So it's really about, pushing those systems to say, where's the fairness and how do we really embrace our young people? Because that's all they need is just that. We don't have to like everything that they do, but if I can
Mm,
understand where you're coming from, that's the start point. That's a launch point. So for us,
mm,
everything is restorative. Everything, the way that we talk to each other, the way that we engage, the way that we set up programming, the way that we come into a community.
Hmm.
We have something called Peacekeepers, which is a homage to the violence interrupted, which comes from ceasefire, right? Cure violence, ceasefire, and so it's just a hyper extension of that.
Hmm.
And in order to do that, we said, well, we know we need guys that have a direct persuasion and influence, but they're coming from this concept of peace, right? And so when we brought this concept, many of the guys in the different neighborhoods were like, "Nah, man, we're not feeling that. That's not with us." And now, 5 years later, they're coming, "Hey, Major, I need an ID, man. I need a badge." I'm like, "What? You want an ID? You want your government name on your?" And they're like, "No, I'm part of something that's greater than me."
Hmm.
And that is incredibly powerful.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
I hear so many threads and connections with what you all are saying. I hear things like education is key, the community is key, the willingness to agitate is key, the importance of creating an environment where healing can happen. I think the thing that I've taken away from this that I've loved the most is that you all in Chicago and New Orleans and in Charlottesville, Virginia are balancing a fine line between we are working against something violence, but we are also working for something which is healing. And that the posture that you all are taking, there's a lot of unity there. But I also love hearing how it's nuanced in each of these cities. So I'm going to start to wrap us up and point people to some next steps and some ways that they can learn more about you all. I'll first put there in the chat and I'll email this to everybody. So the branch of EJUSA I'm with is the Evangelical Network. You can see some of our info there and go there to read more about what we do. We post a lot of good articles, a lot of good info. You can sign up for our email list. I also want to point to you all too, if you're interested in engaging the Christian Community Development Association and the Locked in Solidarity Network, there's a link there to read about what that work looks like. And then I'll also send you all a recording of this and links to all three of these groups that you've heard from so that you can read more about their work and so that you all really what I want you to do is to think through what does it look like to take from the posture, the wisdom and the experience of these men and the work that they're doing and how can we replicate that in our household, within our city, within our neighborhood and all of these spaces. Because while you all are nuancing it to your cities and your spaces, there's a lot that's connected there. And a lot of that connection relates to healing, community, and to restoration. I am thrilled and thankful for the work that you all are doing and the experience that is just held within the four of you. Thank you for that work. I know you're putting yourself at risk. I know that you're bringing a lot of yourself, your whole self to this. So press on with that work. I'm encouraged, inspired, and challenged. And I hope and pray and assume others here are too. So thank you for that work. And for everybody here who's listening, thank you for coming, for leaning into this. These are hard and important questions. And again, I'll reach out with the recording and resources so you all can follow up on all of this. But thanks everyone for coming very, very much.
All right, thank
God
you.
bless everyone, man. God bless you guys. Thank you for all you do.
Peace
All
and
right.
blessings.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right.
See.